I would like to call this meeting of the Cuyahoga County Committee of the Whole for Wednesday, November 14th, 2012 to order, and ask for the clerk to please call the roll.
Calling the roll, Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones is absent. Mr. Rogers? Mr. Rogers is absent. Ms. Simon? I'm here. Mr. Greenspan? Here. Mr. Miller?
Here.
Mr. Brady?
Here.
Mr. Germana?
Here.
Mr. Gallagher?
Here.
Mr. Schron? Mr. Schron is absent. Ms. Conwell?
Here.
Ms. Conley?
Here.
There is a quorum.
Thank you very much. I'd like to ask for a motion to excuse the absence of Jack Schron.
Second.
Second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say no. The ayes have it. His absence is excused. Council members Jones and Rogers are expected to join us shortly. I would now ask the clerk if there is any public comment related to the agenda.
Jill Razika signed in from Towards Employment.
Okay. Please come forward, and you have 3 minutes to address the committee.
Good morning. I'm Jill Rizica. I'm the Executive Director of Towards Employment, and I thank you for the opportunity to share with you this morning the result of a very successful program that you have made possible. Truly, you have paid for success with this program. It's called the Networks for Success, and it prepares job seekers with criminal backgrounds to meet employer needs. Towards Employment's been around for a long time, since 1976. You're passing out a handout there. What I want to focus on, though, is our activity since 2004, where we started to work with individuals with criminal backgrounds, where we've placed over 1,600 individuals with criminal record in full-time employment with above industry standards job retention performance and less than 5% recidivism of our grads. If we take a look at the last 3 years, in a time while unemployment has soared, our economy has soured, Towards Employment actually increased the number of individuals with criminal backgrounds placed in full-time jobs while decreasing the cost per placement. And below you have a chart that looks at our overall agency placements over the last 3 years and the reentry specific placements across the agency, which includes beyond just the Networks for Success program, and you can see that increase. We are successful because we operate as a workforce program first and foremost. Our programming is driven by an understanding of employer needs, and it's focused on consistently delivering quality candidates who stick. It's then we build in the specific additional supports needed to successfully prepare someone with a criminal history to meet employer expectations. So we're really bridging social services and the workforce world. We also, and a critical point, is that we leverage multiple sources of additional funding so that we can accomplish certain things. Achieving scale for greater cost efficiency and effectiveness, to increase the access points. So with some additional funding, we're able to have a neighborhood access point, the North Star Neighborhood Reentry Resource Center, as well as our downtown location. But most importantly, to enhance the services, including more wraparound supports and longer follow-up after placement, two critical inputs to successful outcomes according to all of the evidence-based models. So the core funding for this program is provided by the Office of Reentry, and the additional funding through the Cuyahoga City and Cuyahoga County Workforce Investment Board, but also United Way, local foundations, individuals, the results of our annual event, etc. But without this core from the Office of Reentry, all the rest of those supports become less cost effective. So we do understand that in this era of limited resources, it is important to invest in proven programming that addresses priority issues and delivers results cost effectively. We believe that Networks for Success is such a program. On the second page, you'll just see some graphs that look at the Office of Reentry support. We wanted to share with you this good news. Over the last 3 years, our work with the Office of Reentry has achieved increasingly strong results. As the value of the Office of Reentry's contribution declined, the number of individuals with criminal histories actually increased, the cost per placement decreased, will exceed every benchmark established in our performance-based contract, And though the initial startup costs are high, what you see is a return on investment over time, which will continue to grow now that the infrastructure is in place, the pipeline of candidates is full, and employers are engaged. So there's more information on here, background on the description of the actual program content, but we wanted to share with all of the bad news that's out there, we wanted to share this news of a very successful program that has been accomplished with the county's investment. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for your presentation. It is a very, very important program. It's just so important in Cuyahoga County that we help our people returning with criminal backgrounds to get back on the right track, and getting employment is the single most important factor in making that happen. So thank you very much, and keep up the good work.
Thank you very much for your time.
Okay. I would like to note that Councilman Julian Rogers has joined us for the meeting. Thank you. And before we start, it's time for me to make a few enemies. I would like to announce that one of the items that was introduced into council on Tuesday has to be passed by November 27th, and therefore we are going to have a special meeting of the Finance Committee this Friday at 1 o'clock. So I would appreciate if many of my colleagues that are on Finance Committee can possibly make it. And I do expect the meeting will be fairly short, but we need to do it. Okay, it is time to resume our discussion of the 2013 budget update. No decisions need to be made today. Our goal is to get as much information today as we can about the changes being proposed. We plan to hear all 19 presentations today and need everyone's cooperation to do so. We need presenters to focus on their budget changes and not give us a broad overview of their agencies. Please be selective in asking questions. Our next meeting is not until the 27th, so questions of a more informational and non-budgetary nature can be asked of directors outside of this hearing. Note that a new agenda for today's meeting has been passed out, and there are no changes in the schedule. What's changed is that next to each item is listed the page that agency is presented in the budget book. So as the presenters are called up, you can turn to the page in the budget book and look at the information regarding that agency. We are going to start by having Director Warner make a brief presentation about some issues that pretty much prevail across the board in the Health and Human Services area, and in that way will save us some time so that these items do not have to be repeated for each agency. Director.
Mr. Chairman and members of the Committee of the Whole, thank you very much for the opportunity. I do appreciate the Chairman's willingness to allow me just to address a couple of issues, including some of the issues I think that were raised about the budget during the discussions yesterday. I had the chance to watch most of the discussion of the Human Services portion yesterday on my computer at the office. Just a couple of background things before I talk for just a second about the budget. I wanted to just report back to you on a couple of reorganization issues that have been occurring. Started in 2011 with your approval of the organization ordinance for the Department of Human Services and have continued into 2012. First of all, the Tapestry program, the wraparound program integration into DCFS has been achieved. The DSAS Medicaid unit was merged back into what was then Employment and Family Services in 2011, and that work continues to go forward under what we now refer to as the Cuyahoga Job and Family Services Department, which is the combined EFS and CISA merger. You will hear from Director Gauntner about the work that's gone into merging those two agencies, and we also continue to work on the background and the back office functions for the Division of Community Initiatives, which includes the Family and Children First Council, Invest in Children, the Office of Homeless Services, and Reentry. I also wanted to update you just quickly on the fact that the County Executive's Western Reserve Plan, as you may know, in its fourth principle, asks for a essentially crosswalk or aligning and coordinating of both public human service as well as private nonprofit organizations and their priorities. And as you may know, in the summer, we commenced that process by meeting with the community and a number of agencies and advocates within the community to work on issues of aligning priorities. That work is not done, but it is ongoing, and I think you may hear a little bit from each of the departments that you'll be hearing from today about their strategic planning processes and where they are. Our goal is not necessarily to create an overall Office or Department of Health and Human Services strategic plan as much as it is crosswalking all the priorities to make sure that we are not standing in the way of folks getting their strategic plans done and breaking down barriers where those exist. As I think you also know, the Pay for Success program has started. I think Mr. Merriman and some other folks are in another room in this building doing pre-bid conferences for the request for responses that accompanies the Pay for Success request for response that went out a couple of weeks ago, and so that is ongoing. Before I get to the budget, I just wanted to say thanks, and I think we've had a chance to talk and express our gratitude to the council and the county executive in the past. But one of the reasons that we're able to be up here and talk about 2013 in, I think, a generally positive way is the passage of the Health and Human Service Levy, Issue 15. I know that last March seems like eons ago at this point, but it was the work of the county council in concert with the county executive and many of our partners in the community that allowed that levy, which is the bigger of our two levies, to pass with almost 70% support, the highest level of support it's ever achieved. And so the fact that we are able now to talk about the budget for 2013 and beyond is, without talking about enormous cuts, is thanks to the voters of Cuyahoga County and your leadership as well as that of the county executive. I hate to be the sort of skunk at the garden party, but I will remind everybody that we have another levy that's up at the end of 2014, and so we will, I assume, as part of the 2013's discussions and ongoing, we'll be talking about planning for that levy campaign in 2014. Just a couple of comments about the budget, and then I will finish up my remarks. I think about this time every year, and this goes back, I know Jim McCafferty, the former county administrator and DCFS director, is in the audience. Every year about this time, we begin our discussions in earnest with the Office of Budget and Management on the planning for next year's budget. And it has been the case historically, and I've been in the position I have now for almost 10 years, that we generally talk about now, or we get presented with, as OBM does throughout the year, presents us with their budget projections for the end of the following year. And oftentimes in the past, those budget projections have included deficits. And so then the challenge is to us as staff within the County Human Services Department to begin to work with OBM, in the past the county commissioners, now with the administration and county council, to fashion a response to that. And so while I know that there were lots of questions raised yesterday with the discussion of the human services levy balance, as well as the operating deficit that is forecast for 2013, I do want to say, and I'm not by any means wanting to underestimate the importance of looking at those issues, but it is sort of historically the fact that we have oftentimes begun the conversations for the next year in this kind of situation, and we have worked through both internally within staff and then with the elected officials above us, an appropriate response to that. And so I think if you looked back at the OBM presentations to all of us in human services, if you go back 6 or 8 years, I think you will always find, or oftentimes find, that we are trying to deal with what are anticipated deficits, and I think every year we've tried to do that as effectively and efficiently and thoughtfully as we can, and we've been able to manage through that process without excessive cuts. I think generally speaking, as you'll hear from each of the divisions that you'll hear from today, we are generally underspending our 2012 budgets at this point. I know that there's been a loss of both anticipated levy revenue for 2013 as well as some state cuts that contribute to a large portion of the anticipated deficit, and we're going to need to work through within the department itself, and then working with the administration and council on how to respond to those cuts. One just other thing that I would say, because I know it will come up at least in the conversations with DCFS and employment, or now what we now call CJFS, the former EFS and CISA, as well as DSAS, is the issue of staffing. And I know that council has much interest in making sure, as does the administration, that we have sufficient staff on the ground to be able to serve in an effective fashion the clients and families and individuals that come to us for assistance. I think if you look at our history, we are never fully staffed. It's very difficult in these large organizations with attrition and the churn of staff to be at 100% of staffing. What we attempt very much to do is to recognize the fact that attrition happens and to try to get ahead of that. And I think you'll hear particularly from Director Rideout from DCFS about her discussions with the administration about how to maybe begin to do some anticipatory hiring, staying within the allocated budgets that we have for staff in order to make sure that we are always putting a down payment on filling the positions that we have vacant. But it is very difficult in organizations where you have 400 or 500 social workers like you do at DCFS, or 300 or 400 or 500 caseworkers at CJFS to always be on top and always be fully staffed. But I think OBM and HR, as well as the administration, has been very open to our discussions about how we can improve, starting with in human services, anticipating attrition and then dealing with it in advance. And I think you'll hear from the directors as well that they have been able to bring on new classes of both social workers and eligibility specialists this year. But I will say, and this again is historically true, we've never been able to catch up with all of the vacancies that we have. And so we try our very best to do that, and I think we're finding ways to do that more effectively as we move along. But I did want to say that on behalf of all three of our operating departments. That's obviously not as much of an issue for our smaller offices that generally contract out their work. But for direct service, I'm sure that we are like many other organizations, both public service as well as private, that maintaining that kind of workforce on a constant basis, fully staffed, is a challenge. With that, Mr. Chairman, that was the balance of my remarks. I would be happy to come up during discussions with the individual departments if there are overall departmental questions, or also I will be here through the end and could answer any questions at the end of your questions for our individual divisions.
Okay, we have a question from Councilman Brady.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, you alluded to the fact that this isn't the first time, or probably the last time, that we've faced and anticipated some deficit issues. And you indicated that those had been worked through without too many words. Could you give us just one example of when that happened and what you did?
Sure, Mr. Chairman, to Councilman Brady, I can't give you the exact years, but I know that there have been occasions in the past where when we sit down with OBM, I think it happened as we entered into fiscal year 2000, county fiscal year 2011. When we were planning for that in 2010, we showed deficits at the end of the year. It also depends on where we are in the levy cycle and where we are in terms of collections on the levies. And so I would prefer, if you would indulge me, Councilman, to get back to you with specific years in which we can show those kinds of swings, essentially. And it's not the fact that the information is inaccurate. It's just that you're making an estimate based on what you anticipate the revenue to be for the following year at the end of that following year, and you sort of straight line the expenses through that year with any additions that have been made during that year. And so rather than sort of doing it completely from memory, I'd prefer to get you a little bit of a history of that if I could.
Mr. Chairman.
Please continue.
I would appreciate that. I would like to start with not reinventing the wheel here. If there's something we can look back to give us some guidance. Just one more question at this point. Rick, do we have to address, and you sort of you did address this a little bit in your opening comment, but is this projected deficit in Health and Human Services, is this something that we have to address now?
Mr. Chairman, to Councilman Brady, I would say that the planning and discussion that this conversation causes needs to start now in order for us to be able to adequately make recommendations to the county executive that he can take over and have conversations with you about. Is there something that needs to be done today or next week and passed in order to deal with this? I think the answer to that is no. I'm assuming that the outcome of the process that you're going through, both for Human Services as well as the other parts of the county, may well result in corrections to the 2013 budget, as I know you've made all year as you've gone through your biweekly meetings. So I would say that the next couple of weeks we should focus the kind of attention that you expect us to look at this situation and to come back to you through the county executive with recommendations. But I don't believe, and this is again based on my participation in these discussions over a number of years, there's nothing that we need to do right now other than to plan for 2013 thoughtfully and with understanding the reality of the situation that we're in. But I would think that action that the county executive and the county council could take by the end of the year or early 2013, if history is a guide, will provide us with the opportunity to make whatever corrections we need to make and stay within the revenue as well as providing the kind of service that I think you expect us to try to maintain.
So end of the year or early next year?
Yes, and I will certainly defer to Mr. Steen and Mr. Rubino as the architects of the overall county budget. But from my perspective, as long as we're paying attention to this now, we're analyzing it internally within Human Services, talking with OBM and making recommendations to the county executive. There is no reason at this point for, this is not a 4-alarm fire at this point. This is indications that we have to manage through this as we have in past years, and we need to take that seriously and begin to address it now.
Thank you.
Okay, I would like to note for the record that Councilman Jones has joined the meeting. Any other questions for the director? Councilman Greenspan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Obviously, this is we have some issues here with the Health and Human Service funding, and and in looking at a little bit of the issue, we've kind of a double issue. We've got declining income by about $14 million, but then on top of it, we also have an increase in demand and cost almost in an equal amount, which comes to a deficit of about $28 million going into 2013 to be able to fund the 2013 projected budget, which is about 12.5%. And I'm glad that Councilmember Brady brought that up because I brought up the issue and the concern because from my perspective, not to put pressure on you, but I'm going to rely heavily on you to help us navigate through how we balance this as best we can with utilizing as little reserves as possible, but at the same time being cognizant there are members of our community who really need assistance. So I don't really have a question, more of putting pressure on you that we're going to be I'm going to be relying on you and your department and with Mr. Rubino, Mr. Steen, to come up with some solutions to reduce this deficit. So if you have institutional knowledge, because it's been done in the past, sharpen your pencils because we're going to really need to drill down. This continued as the budget lays out through 2015, 2016, will utilize the entire reserve balance within the next 2 to 3 years, which will then, if we allow that to continue unchecked, come 2016, there will be significant reductions, whereas we may be able to mitigate some of that with some early planning and intervention. So we're going to rely on you to be very blunt and honest with what we need to do in order to provide services for not only 2013, but looking out multiple years.
Mr. Chairman and Councilman Greenspan, I appreciate your comments very much, and if you were relying just on me, then I would be a little bit nervous. But there's a good group of folks both on the budget side, OBM, as well as in the program management and the management of our departments. And I do think you put your finger on a very important piece of this, which is we have seen and continue to see an increased demand for service, and that is the sort of counter-cyclical nature, unfortunately, of human services. Is that as there's a bad economy with less revenue for all of us, including the county government through the levies and otherwise, there's oftentimes a corresponding increase for services. And how to manage through that is a very important piece of that. I do think that we have experience doing some of that. I think we've been faced with situations perhaps not in this, I mean, every year is a little bit different, but I do think that there's a very qualified group of folks within the budget side of Human Services, as well as our partners within OBM and the Executive's Office, to make recommendations to you for you to consider in a thoughtful way, and to Councilman Brady's point, in sufficient time to deal with the situation that we're faced with. So I appreciate the confidence. I'll thank you on behalf of the entire Human Services Department, but I think we will be able to make recommendations to you that I hope make sense to you and will avert any kind of significant budget challenge for us in 2013. And to your point, also looking for the longer term.
Thank you.
Ms. Conwell.
To the chair, to the director, how will our next levy impact this situation that we're facing now? Will it have an impact?
Mr. Chairman, to Councilwoman Conwell, I mean, obviously the existence of the levy that's represented by the one that'll be, or the levy that will be on the ballot in 2014 is crucial to our ability to project over the long term, to Councilman Greenspan's point. Right now, we know that levy is in place through the end of 2014, and so our conversations as respects that, the revenue from that levy, anticipating that there may be changes to it as a result of collections, and obviously the reevaluation process of properties, that will have an effect on this. But that levy is in place. And I think the conversation for the county council along with the county executive when we get closer to 2014 is how do we deal with that particular levy, and that's a elected official conversation, which I know you'll have. I know it was had earlier this year as we approached the levy that was on the ballot this year. But specifically, it's very crucial that we begin to talk in 2013 and obviously in early 2014 about that levy, because it plays into, it will very much affect the revenue for the County Human Services Department from January 1st, 2015 and forward.
Anything else? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee.
Our goal is to hear 7 agencies by noon. Presentations need to be brief, questions need to be selective, answers to questions need to be brief. It's time to hear on behalf of the Children and Family Services from Director Rideout. Good morning.
The first 4 or 5 slides are the straightforward budget that was provided to us by OBM. And other than noting several slides in, that the biggest budget change for us has to do with the transfer of our IT staff to the ISC. There aren't a lot of changes here to comment on. So in light of our need to be succinct today, I will not spend my time presenting those, but would be happy to hear your questions about it. So I'd like to dive into the things you asked specifically about with regard to staffing levels. And that begins, I believe, on slide 6. Yes. As you can see here, we continue to struggle to fill our vacant budgeted positions and bring our staffing levels up to a level that we think is necessary to deliver the job that we need to do. This chart shows the filled positions as of December 31st of each of these years, and for 2012, a projection which indicates that we have we're predicting about 10 more staff leaving us by the end of the year, as well as 9 retirees. As you know, there are some changes coming in PERS, and so far we've had 9 staff notify us that they'll be leaving us. So those are the figures reflected in our projected number of 764 by the end of this year. We may have some more retirees, but that's what we know now. The next couple of slides merely provide a visual of what our staffing situation has looked like this past year. And this one, it reflects all of our staff. As you can see, we have been kind of on a downward trend. We had a slight uptick during the summer when we were able to hire a social work training class for the first time in a couple of years. We were able to start that class in May, and I believe that was 23 new workers. We had another class that began in June, 15 new workers. But of course, the problem is that by now we have kind of lost the staff that we gained in those hiring periods. This next chart is strictly social workers, and it shows pretty much the same kind of a pattern here. The next few slides are summaries of how our year has gone in terms of budget-affected staffing situations. The first one addresses one of our major realignment efforts, which was we were able to fill a vacant Deputy Director for Administrative Services position and realign all the staff, which had been distributed to other folks during that vacancy, under this new deputy. And that's been a very successful piece of our work this year. The next slide, actually, the top bullet references one piece of the administrative services area, which we were able to create out of existing staff, which is a performance management unit, which we're very pleased with. We were able to hire an administrator, again, out of a vacant position, and we're really feeling some improvement in our ability to use data to drive our performance and our practice improvements. The second bullet here describes another realignment having to do with our support services staff. This is the area of the agency where we process and refer families to a variety of contracted services, and they're all listed there. We also were able, through this realignment, to create a clinical consultation arm within that unit, again using existing staff, to provide specific clinical help to our staff in planning services for the families that we serve. And now, just to finish up, a few slides describing activities that will have an impact on our staff in the year ahead. On this slide, my main point would simply be to focus on the first bullet. We really do hope to make significant progress in achieving timely and full social work staffing through first filling our vacant budgeted positions. As you saw, we have quite a few of those now. And also then, in an effort to be prudent and planful, we hope maybe by mid-year to have filled those vacancies and to be really looking at an anticipatory hiring approach, since we're pretty clear on what the patterns are here and what our attrition rates are, although I do hope they'll go down a little bit once people have to stop absorbing each other's caseloads. It becomes a cyclical problem, as you know. And if we could, in fact, move in this direction toward looking ahead a couple of months, hiring the positions we need so that we weren't constantly in that position of having to absorb other people's workloads and thereby stress the workers who are carrying these cases now, which very much concerns me in terms of the quality of the work they're able to do. The other items on this list, many of you have heard before when I spoke to Councilman Brady's committee this summer. These are all staff positions or plans that will, we hope, occur in the year ahead. They are, with the exception of the final bullet, all things that are currently budgeted for. We're simply trying to work through the process of making them all happen. My comment on the final bullet with regard to transportation is that this is one area where we did lose staff a couple of years ago. It was a part of our AFSCME layoff that occurred in 2009 that is still very troubling to me, which has to do with how do we make sure kids in care are seeing their families very regularly, which of course is something that's needed in order to achieve timely reunification, safe reunification. We presently have the workers doing the driving and the supervision of these visits, and that's a concern. It has changed their workload considerably. With our contracted providers who provide the bulk of our foster care, there's also a need to make sure that more frequent visits occur in that realm as well. That's also a dollars and cents issue as we work toward some contract adjustments to make sure that we can insist on at least weekly visits for all kids in care. On this slide, I would mention simply that we are working toward a strategic planning process to begin next month. We haven't had a strategic plan at DCFS in a number of years, and we feel that that's a very important step, and it will also, of course, have an impact on our expenditure of budgeted funds as we move forward. One more slide, again, referencing a number of our program initiatives. And again, I think I'd prefer to let you guys ask me questions about these rather than me zip through the whole list, because I think you've seen most of them before.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Questions for the director?
Mr. Chairman.
Councilman Brady.
In trying to keep this brief, which let me say I understand the need to do this, but since a lot of this goes to the heart of our most important part of our discussion that we're trying to deal with, we are going to have some more time, either in this committee or in the Health and Human Services Committee, to discuss these issues. There's no way in 10 minutes, 15 minutes we can have this discussion. But I understand that we're trying to have an entire budget update. So let me just ask you, I know, or I believe there's a fairly high turnover of caseworkers in your department. Is that correct?
Right, and it's gone up a bit in recent months.
And why is that? I mean, in this economy, why would people be leaving their jobs?
I wish I had a documentable answer. I do know that workers tell us, as they've always told us, that it's an incredibly hard job, but they're quite frustrated, as I've mentioned earlier in the presentation, about the fact that we are unable to fill vacancies quickly. And so whenever someone leaves, and we're averaging between 4 and 5 workers a month leaving, the workers who stay absorb the workloads of those who leave. And that means that they never really feel they've got a good handle on their own work. It's frustrating. It's scary because they have obligations to make sure kids are safe, not to mention obligations to make sure kids have families, which may not be as crisis-oriented, but it's equally important. So the job, I think, gets more frustrating the less able we are to ensure that we're filling positions.
One more question, Mr. Chairman. Last fall, when we had budget hearings, we tried to make sure that there was sufficient funding. I had said concerns that at that time that we weren't sufficiently funding this department, but we were informed that we were. And we made every effort we could to give you the resources. So is it a problem of resources, or is it a problem or is there some other issues involved beyond resources?
We have the dollars to do the hiring that I've been talking about here. The hiring process is very complex, requires a lot of collaboration between us and HR, R&D, OBM. Thanks. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. And we simply haven't been able to work through that process and get the approvals we need to hire all of the positions that we need.
Well, I mean, I don't want to drag this on, and I don't want to point any fingers, but where's the breakdown? Where's the breakdown in the collaboration?
I'm not sure I can speak personally to that. I can assure you that within my department, we've been working very, very diligently to hire as many positions as we can gain the approval to hire.
Well, I'm going to keep asking this question to other people till I find out where it is. But thank you very much.
Okay.
Other questions? Ms. Simon?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to follow up on Councilman Brady's questioning, and I'd like to get into this more in a separate committee meeting. But with regard to this breakdown, is it the time period to reclassify positions, posting? What exactly where do you see this time delay happening with regard to hiring?
There are upwards of 30-plus steps between our decision to request a filled vacancy and our ability to make an offer. So for me to say exactly where, I just don't think I can. But again, I want you to know that we track this very, very carefully. I worry a great deal about staffing. We work very closely with the other county departments. I think everybody's got their challenges. I really cannot explain at which of those many steps it gets stuck, other than to tell you that for the social worker positions particularly, I can assure you that we're working diligently through that and they're not getting stuck in my shop.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And maybe we can follow up at some point about exactly what's the average turnaround time between when you start and actually get a vacancy filled. So that will be for further discussion, hopefully.
Mr. Chairman, just as a follow-up, if I applied for a job today, what would be the average amount of time before I got hired?
I think we consider that to be a minimum 4-month process,
4 months? I mean, I'm going to go out and look for another job in 4 months.
and people do.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions?
Mr. Chairman,
Councilman Rogers.
just for clarity on this budget summary, I'm looking at the approved budget of 137 million, and then the 2013 proposed updates of 1.8 million, and then the recommended budget of, again, 137 million point two. And I'm wondering, I guess I'm not doing the math right, but something's not adding up as far as the first page. Or it's listed page 2. I'm wondering, what's the minus 1.8? What is that being subtracted from?
That figure represents, I believe, our loss of our IT positions to the ISC this year. Looking for a thumbs up from
This
David.
does not represent an actual reduction in funding. A reorganization is being done where the IT people are being centralized, and so the IT expenses are being taken out of the individual agency budgets and moved into a separate agency in the general fund.
Okay.
You'll see this consistently throughout almost all of the agency budgets.
As I've been looking through it, it's been confusing because, this change is represented, it's shown, but it's not really represented in the numbers that we get in this quick snapshot.
When we hear from Director Mowry in the afternoon, we'll get a more detailed explanation about this. Okay.
Mr. Chair, I think I should also say, and I'm not sure this is what you were getting at, but, the surplus that we're showing for this year is largely due to the personnel vacancies that we've had. And I believe there were some adjustments made in our budget relative to shifting monies dedicated to salaries to monies needed for benefits. Can't catch David's eye, but I believe that's correct.
Councilman Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the staffing impact, the reinstatement of transportation units, now that you plan to reinstate them for next year, what impact is that going to have on the budget?
Yeah, I want to be clear. As I mentioned, it is a hope at this point versus a plan. It does have a significant budget implication, and it is not yet something. Everything else I've put on these slides, we've already budgeted for. We know exactly where it's coming from. I mention it here because it's that important to me. But in fact, we have some work to do with OBM. to figure out how and if we could, in fact, take that step. So I want to be clear about that, yeah.
Remind me, how much was it before?
Oh, gosh. I think our estimate, if we were able to do it, to refill positions sufficiently to meet the need, is somewhere in the range of 500 to 750,000. So it's very significant.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Councilman Germano.
Mr. Chairman, I think that the question that was asked by Councilman Brady, about the funding is adequate, and really that's why we're here. We're here to talk about the money, the budget, and not to discount all these management questions. But I mean, this is the first department. I think we've got to stay to the money questions and follow up on the management things in your committee. Otherwise, we'll never get through this.
Okay. Anything else? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next, we will hear from Cuyahoga County Job and Family Services, Joe Gauntner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the committee and members of the audience, I will not be using the overhead display. I believe the committee has been provided with a copy of our handout, which is headed Cuyahoga Job and Family Services. We had 40 copies, so I believe there'll be enough for the audience. I think the first thing I need to do is apologize that there's an error on the title sheet. What it says is Joseph Gauntner, Interim Administrator, and as of today, I am the former Interim Administrator. Or to be more explicit, I am now appointed as of today as the administrator for Cuyahoga Job and Family Services. So I'm pleased to be with you within that context. And for the remainder of my 5 minutes, I'm going to speak very briefly about the first slide, but let me touch on some of the items that we were asked to identify with respect to the budget changes. There were 3 of significance, but I don't believe they are controversial. They represent the transfer of staff for the Department of Information Technology. They represent a summer youth program that we, similar to last year, which we are anticipating state TANF money for. And thirdly, it reflects changes in bargain unit conversation and some adjustment of fringe benefit rates. I believe that those are the budget changes. If I might speak directly to one of the issues that I believe Councilman Brady just raised with respect to, and perhaps Mr. Miller too, with respect to the staffing discussions that started last year. Within the budget of the then-time Department of Employment and Family Services, 6 additional positions were allocated by council and approved to be implemented mid-year. My understanding of the mid-year timing of those additional 6 positions was to give time to the administration to identify offsetting efficiencies that would still allow the department to add 6 caseworkers without necessarily having to add to the employment base. I believe that we have done that. I had, in my prior role as deputy chief, I had not received a request from Dr. Jones, the previous administrator, for those 6 positions. I do not anticipate presenting that request, but know that we have requisitions in the works to fill that number of caseworkers. So I do anticipate that Dr. Jones started and we will be completing is shifting of other non-direct service positions to fill those. Excuse me. With respect, Mr. Werner already spoke about the merger of the Child Support Enforcement Agency and Employment and Family Services. One specific recommendation I would make to the committee is recognizing that we now have a single banner of Cuyahoga Job and Family Services, that in the budget that develops, or the change that develops, that we look to have a single budget for Cuyahoga Job and Family Services, within which we can have appropriate segregation of the costs. The one slide I would really like to just focus a few of my comments on is the first one that says 2013 key issues. And while there are some non-financial issues here, it really is my intent in highlighting these issues to provide background for some of the financial discussions that are yet to happen. Certainly, I believe Mr. Rubino yesterday referenced the so-called federal cliff as currently constructed. If that goes into effect, this will not have an immediate impact on our operating revenues. However, I don't think we can rely upon that necessarily being the case. I can only assume that when the parties come together that everything will be on the table. With respect to financial risk and program changes, which was one of the areas we were asked to respond to, the state budget will also have significant potential there. We understand that the state of Ohio is going to let the federal government run the health care exchange, but the state will keep control of the Medicaid eligibility. Within the area of Medicaid eligibility, it is both possible in the next year, on one hand, we will be responsible for tens of thousands of more individuals, and that would assume a Medicaid expansion with the county's continuing role of eligibility, or the state could centralize the eligibility process for about 100,000 recipients. So we're either going to have a lot more folks, or at the end of the day, a lot less. I don't know which way that's going to be. My sense is we won't know that for a little bit. We've spoken within the Health and Human Services Committee and then very briefly at full council about the TANF work participation issue. I'm here to report that from the month of August to September, we increased 8 points to 33% from 25. We still have a ways to go to get to 50. The program impact of this, though, is that over the last year, as we pushed individuals to be more responsive to their obligations under the law and our obligations under the law, the work participation roles in Cuyahoga County have been cut in half, as they have approximately throughout the state. So we continue to look to the needs of these folks. With respect to child support collections, for the federal fiscal year just completed, we collected $240 million. Unfortunately, this is down for the second year in a row. And it's down because we collect money when people make money, quite frankly. And so this really talks to, the last bullet, as does TANF work participation, about some of the areas that we will be focusing on in the coming year with respect to the employment opportunities for low-wage workers. We've reached out to the Federal Policy Office, Center for Budget and Policy Priorities. We've begun talking with other county colleagues and have some consultations pending with other local program providers. Mr. Chairman, with that, I would pause and certainly respond to any remarks or questions.
Mr. Chairman.
Councilman Brady.
Thank you. Mr. Gottner, you're quite a veteran here in the county and have really dedicated your life to this kind of work, and we very much appreciate that. Highly regard your skill and your experience. I'm going to ask you the same question I asked Mr. Warner. You've been through these cycles in the past. You've seen these things happen in the past. I know you're not going to be able to give us policy suggestions off the top of your head, but could you give us some examples of what has been done in the past to deal with dwindling resources?
Mr. Chairman, I certainly can. First, if I may, though, just very briefly, I would like to highlight one of the points that Mr. Greenspan made when he was speaking about the people coming to us for help in many ways. The committee very appropriately yesterday had a significant discussion about the financial risk of this current budget. What we have not really brought to the table, though, is the service risk in our community, which is on the other side of that conversation. Folks may have seen in the paper this morning, we expect a significant cut in food stamp benefits to the people, not just of our county, to the state, and quite frankly, this northeast region of the nation. The annual payroll there is about $500 million a year. The cuts could go as high as $50 million. For our county, I think it'll be a little less. But that is just one small example of the service network that our operating budget finances. One particular example that stands out, and for some of my colleagues, my guess is I may be the most senior in terms of age of any of us up here at the front of the room, so some folks may not remember or recall the safe crisis in Cuyahoga County. But in the 20 years that I've been a director or been in governance here, that was certainly one that stands out, when in a very short period of time, we had to crank down spending and make a series of radical changes. In the role that I'm in, I don't really would not deem to offer to council policy advice speaking for the administration. If I may take a point of personal privilege as perhaps the longest reigning director, if you count the last 2 years, we're going to be having, I think we're going to be having this conversation for about the next 4 months. That I understand council has actions it needs to take in the shorter term, and in saying that, I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but I think both the nature of what's happening at the federal level, we know, for example, that the waiver at Metro is about to be approved this month. That will have some spillover impact for the behavioral health world. There are a number of things that I think in the first quarter that are going to unroll, some of which will be clear. Admittedly, some of them probably won't. But it's my guess that we're going to be looking at this conversation that council has been starting in the last day or so for the next 4 months.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay. Councilman Jones.
We discussed the work participation rate quite a bit. I'm glad to see that it's gone up, and I certainly want to stay on point, but I'd like to just briefly hear what has happened, what has been done that has pushed the percentage up to 33%.
Well, I believe, to the councilman through the chair, I think there are 3 or 4 things that the department has been working on this last year. And let me start from the back end of the process, one of which is getting better reporting and recording from folks who are enrolled in allowable activities. Approximately 1/4, as I understand, of the current individuals who are in the Welfare to Work program are in an education program or a training program, and quite frankly, I think this is a good thing, the idea being that someone could do a little better when they leave us and have less likelihood of coming back. In the past, though, I think did not push as much with the schools about getting verified information. The message to the schools is, get us the information, get the student to get us the information, or we're going to tell this person they have to go do something else. So that's one. Secondly, with that same population, reminding them during periods of breaks that they need to fill in that obligation. One element of the summer jobs program that council approved this last year, there was a segmented element for folks with a work participation requirement who are in school during the year. So we gave them something to do, if you will, to fill in around those school hours. So that's one thing. Secondly, we did 100% case review of all work assignments. That means going over, do we understand this person's situation correctly? You know, was this someone who maybe had a child 4 months ago and we should have called in more promptly than we did? There has been also a redefinition there's a process of looking at individuals when they first come in. An individual may be assigned to alternative work if they have perception of a medical condition or some other difficulty that makes them unable to work. And working with the state of Ohio, we went and clarified those parameters. Again, who should we be expecting to participate, who should we not be? And then probably the last thing is to increase the use of sanctions, which a sanction for if an individual does not comply with their work participation plan, they might lose a benefit for 1 month, 3 months, or 6 months.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next, we're going to have Director Tracy Mason presenting on behalf of Senior and Adult Services. And the material has just been completed and I believe is going to be passed out now, so it's not in the pile that you have yet.
Good morning. While you're receiving your packet, I'm just going to go ahead and just introduce myself. I am Tracy Mason. I'm the administrator for the Division of Senior and Adult Services. I also wanted to just share with you our mission statement, which is to provide in-home and community-based services to seniors and disabled adults based on their individual needs. DSA's role has been pretty much twofold in the community, where we provide adult protective services, which is mandated by the state, as well as home support care, options for elders, case management support, and information and outreach. And we also contract with various senior centers throughout the county to meet the needs in the community. As of September 30th, DSAS have served nearly 17,000 seniors and disabled adults. We expect to exceed last year's client count by 20%. So you should have your PowerPoint presentation. I'll just dive right on into the first slide. Our recommended budget for 2013 revenue totals a little bit more than $15.5 million, while expenditures total $16.9 million. And as you already know, the shortfall will be covered through the Public Assistance Reserve Fund. Also, just to share with you regarding our staffing, our budget has the same FTEs as prior year. We are currently at 167 employees in terms of that's on board at this point. So we roughly have around 17 vacancies. And of those 17 vacancies, we're working close with HR to fill approximately around half of those positions. The next slide, summary of funding sources. Again, here, the 2012 estimate for other revenue is primarily federal and social services at $3.3 million. And the 2013 revenue reflects a 43% reduction in federal and social service funding. Overall growth in Health and Human Service levy is due to the reduction in Ohio Department of Jobs and Family Services. Also, I wanted to point out within other revenue, DSAS has a couple contracts in the community, particularly with Western Reserve Area Agency to support the ADRN network, which is an aging disability network for seniors, as well as passport counseling. We also have charges for services where our clients pay a copay for services within options and home support. The next slide, expenditures by line item. As you can clearly see, this is a breakdown of our expenses for 2013. We've had some changes that's reflected in the salaries, as well as fringe benefits and contracts, which you see a net effect of negative $481,000. And the next slide give you a little bit more detail of the breakdown. Within personal service of a negative $264,000, that reflects a transfer from the IT staff that was in our last budget, as well as reallocating some other positions to cover the cost of our rent. DSAS has relocated just in September to the Mount Pleasant community, and so our rent has increased as well as our utilities have increased with the new location. Personal benefits is reflection of a 6% increase in health care costs. And again, the contracts and professional services, that increases to support the rent for our new location. On the final slide, you will see a set of priorities that have been identified. Coming on board with DSAS, we were not operating from a current strategic plan. So as a result of that, I've along with the staff, identified 4 areas of concentration that we've been focusing on to enhance and maintain community partnerships while developing and nurturing new partnerships, as well as creating an agency culture of leadership and development. In addition to creating an environment to fully integrate technology to strengthen our database collection processes, improve and streamline quality assurance, as well as create efficiencies for staff. So while we've identified these priorities for us to concentrate on for the upcoming year, we also recognize that we actually need a strategic plan in place. So we have established a work group so we can start the planning stages to engage in a strategic planning effort next year. And I just mentioned that we've relocated to Mount Pleasant Community from downtown Reserve Square. So that pretty much concludes my presentation. I'm sure you have questions for me.
Director, you hit a lot of very important points in not much time. Thank you very much for a fine presentation. Councilman Brady.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. This is just informational. Director Mason is going to be in front of the Health and Human Services Committee tomorrow at 2 o'clock in the afternoon for those on the committee and those who aren't on the committee after we do the tour of the buildings. So if you'd like to hear more, I know I do, we're going to be digging into that tomorrow.
I want to hear more. I'm going to make it a date. Ms. Conley.
I just wanted to say very briefly that I had dealings with one of your workers for adult and senior services, and she was extremely helpful. And
Great.
I'll give you her name off the record, but she was very, very helpful, and I continue to work with her regarding the senior citizen who has some serious problems. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions for Director Mason? Okay. Thank you very much. You got off easy.
Yes.
Okay. Next, we're going to call forward Director Rebecca Dorman to speak regarding Office of Early Childhood and Invest in Children. Thank you very much. Please proceed.
Thank you. Thanks for this opportunity. I am not going to throw anything up on the screen, but the hard copies are coming. We have sort of a simple, fairly straightforward story to tell, but the numbers look very misleading. So I sort of want to take you big picture through what looks like a $4.6 million loss of revenue. So what I want to explain, that is, those are all state dollars. Those are Help Me Grow dollars. And decisions were made at the state level as well as at the local level, which means that those dollars, which still do exist and still, I want to emphasize, are flowing to agencies to provide services, they're just not flowing through Invest in Children any longer. So the state decided that for the state Help Me Grow home visiting program for at-risk families that had previously been under Invest in Children and under the county, that they were changing their model, and instead ODH, Ohio Department of Health, now contracts directly with agencies and has sort of cut out the middleman, if we were considered the middleman. So at this point, we know there are 3 agencies in the county, 3 service providing agencies who do have contracts. Help Me Grow dollars would be flowing directly to those agencies. I don't know, we're not told exactly dollar amounts, et cetera. I know that it's a rolling admissions kind of process, so as other agencies want to go through the application process, they can, so other agencies may have contracts in the future. So that was the state decision, and that's because they're hoping eventually to switch that to a Medicaid model of funding. There were some obstacles at the state level. They've sort of retracted from moving to Medicaid at this point in time, but the GRF dollars from the state are flowing, and that program does continue. Services are being provided. So that's half of the $4.6 million you see in loss of revenue on that first slide, page 2. The other half of those dollars, the other $2.3 million, are also state dollars. Those are for early intervention, Help Me Grow dollars. Again, those used to flow through Invest in Children. We locally made a decision to try and streamline the flow of those dollars, take away some of the steps involved. It is within our purview to designate where those dollars go. Actually, they come to the Family and Children First Council, which had designated them to come through Invest in Children, then back over to Help Me Grow, and that was just adding steps. It really confused the state continually how we operated, so we decided for this year that the dollars would flow just directly to the Educational Services Center, which is the fiscal agent for Help Me Grow. So the bottom line again is it is not a loss of dollars coming to the county. It is not a loss in services. It simply looks that way because the dollars are not flowing through Invest in Children. So I think that's important because it certainly looks like a big hit in our budget. But the bottom line is, as far as we know, kids and families are still being served. Okay, so that's probably the biggest news. So if I take you through to, I think slide 4 is where you'll see there's a very slight real change in our budget, which is just that $4,620 in additional fringe for additional health care costs. Otherwise, funding from 2012 to 2013 is going to be level in terms of local dollars for services. But I know you're very interested in hearing about how we spent. We did get some additional dollars this year, so there was a change from 11 to 12. And on my final slide, I would like to talk to you about that additional funding, which I understand was of interest. So Bright Beginnings, which is our county-funded home visiting program, it is, and this is where it gets a little confusing. Help Me Grow is the service provider, but it's not, again, this is not the state Help Me Grow program. This is our locally controlled program, which we call Bright Beginnings. It is delivered through Help Me Grow, which is, I know, a little bit confusing. We established this program, just to remind you, because the state put some very narrow eligibility on how their dollars could be spent and the eligibility for the state-funded home visiting program. Bright Beginnings, 3/4 of the referrals come from the Department of Children and Family Services. We've really worked hard to improve that coordination so we can be a support to DCFS and their families. So this year we were able to serve, with the additional dollars we got, 286 children. This is annualized, over the course of the year in high-risk families. The other additional dollars that we received this year was for universal pre-kindergarten. And we also distributed a map to you showing in highlight the new sites. One slight correction where it says on your slide that there were 9 new sites. It's actually 9 new agencies, 11 sites, and you'll see those highlighted. So we conducted an RFP process this year with the additional funds that we had received, and those were the new agencies brought on board. The bottom line is that 300 additional children will be receiving services through Universal Pre-K in the service year that started this fall. So those are really very specifically the changes. We're still currently an 8 FTE department. We have 1 vacancy. My understanding is that we will be able to fill that vacancy, and that was for our communications manager. The only other thing I can tell you is we recognize that public funds are limited, so we continue to look for private dollars to do other projects, and we have a number of grant-funded programs. We're seeking more private grant funds so that we can continue to meet the needs of the community and grow despite the limits that public funding has right now. So I know that was quick. I tried to just do highlights, so I'll just stop there and be happy to take questions.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Are there questions? Councilman Rogers.
Chairman, I just have one. If you can provide the total numbers for the Bright Beginnings and Universal Pre-K?
Total numbers of children being served. For Bright Beginnings this year, I believe we're at about 680. I can give you a direct, I mean, it changes, but approximately. For UPK, the total number would be 1,500. So we went from 1,200 to 1,500.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. We now go to Director Vasquez from the Office of Reentry.
Good morning, Council. Let me wait till this is turned on. In the meantime, in the spirit of time, let me go through the, you have the hard copy of the presentation till we're able to get this resolved. I think we're almost there. Why don't we get started? You know, I just don't want to take any much longer than we have to. If you look at your first page on the PowerPoint, the budget summary, the only change that I will address at this particular point has been on the proposed updates of the 2013 the revenues, which is $4,307, and that really is attributed to the same piece that other colleagues of mine addressed today in terms of French benefits. Really is an increase of employer shares and hospitalization costs. So that's why you see the number of the $4,307. I also want to address under the summary of funding sources regarding other revenues. You see noted on the 2013 quarter 3 estimate 3,500. Those were dollars that were provided by United Way as they paid for half of the cost of our first major recidivism study, which was around $7,000, and that was a 500 sample. That's why you see that. But I also need to note that on the...
Sorry to interrupt.
I'm sorry.
But I didn't catch what page that number was.
That would be under the summary of funding sources, other revenues, $3,500. I believe it's page 3 of the PowerPoint, right under the levy fund.
I'm with you.
Okay. I also want to note, even though we don't have it under the other revenues, I think it's important to note, if you look at the PowerPoint, page 8, where it talks about the Office of Reentry being the recipient of the Second Chance Act Grant Award. Last year at this particular time, Director Garner announced that Cuyahoga County had been the recipient of the 2012 Second Chance Act Grant Award for $685,303. I'm pleased to announce that Cuyahoga County was also selected to be the recipient of the 2013 Second Chance Act Grant Award for $749,679. With those particular funds, we continue to fund the severe threat group, approximately 150 individuals who will be returning back to our county who are part of a severe threat group when they come back into our county from the state institutions. That will allow us to continue leveraging the dollars through this second chance. And I must indicate that we're extremely pleased with the support that not only all of our stakeholders provided in this particular application, but also the Office of Senator Portman, who, as you know, he is the co-author of the Second Chance Act in a bipartisan fashion with Senator Leahy from Vermont, and provided a great deal of support and assistance in this particular award, which is very highly competitive. So as you look at our budget, those are the two major changes that we see. I think it's also important to know that we continue to place many of our dollars within this limited budget towards the services that we're here to provide. In the supportive documentation that I provided for you today, there's a number of pieces that are very important. There are two pieces of legislation, Senate Bill 337 and House Bill 86 on sentencing reform, as well as collateral sanctions. Those are two major pieces of legislation that were introduced and approved this year in the state of Ohio. Actually, Attorney General Eric Holder noted in May of this last year at the Second Chance Act Grant Conference that he would like to see all the Attorney Generals in Ohio mirror the legislative efforts in the state of Ohio regarding these two pieces of legislation for the reentry community. So that was well noted at a national conference. Furthermore, I also want to take this time to really extend our appreciation for the support the Council has provided. You see the last copy of our newsletter. If you look at the second page regarding the ban in the box, and I know the leadership of the Council as well as the County Executive in approving this piece that was long due, but it came at the right time for us here in our county in terms of really setting the example regarding this particular component that you had approved as an ordinance. I also provided some other pieces of documentation regarding our social enterprises. Had an opportunity most recently to have meet with Councilwoman Vice President Simon regarding one of the projects that we have in partnership with the Cleveland Foundation, which is one of our social enterprises that will take place on Mayfield Road and Green Avenue. That is a spa salon that is part of the program that we are in partnership with the Cleveland Foundation. And most recently, last Friday, I had invited Councilwoman Conwell to attend and see the other project that is in her district regarding the Lutheran Methodist Ministries and the catering kitchen component. And she had a chance to view that building, the new building for Lutheran Methodist Ministry, which is the headquarters, I believe is on 46th and Superior. So those are pieces of information. One of the questions that you brought to my attention regarding the additional dollars that were provided and approved by Council, where were those dollars directed? We have directed those dollars first and foremost to a housing piece. We are very pleased the work that CMHA has done through Director Jeff Patterson. For some of you that might be aware, historically, the reentry community has not had really access to public housing. We've had a dedicated unit now at the Stokes Mall on Woodland Avenue that is manned 24/7 and that is dedicated a wing of approximately 23 housing units, housing 2 people per unit. And we have been working with CMHA for the past 3 years. We felt that it was very important not to lose that housing opportunity, especially in public housing, because, you know, in all the research that I've done nationwide, it hasn't been open, and there's been a lot of restrictions for individuals who are returning back to our community with a prison record to have access to public housing. Furthermore, we're going to address a component of those dollars into our new strategic planning process regarding the employment and training component with an entrepreneurship piece addressing that also. I provided for you a copy of our new strategic plan that we launched on June 25th at the Reentry Summit in partnership with the U.S. Attorney's Office. We felt it was important for the Office of Reentry, since we started providing service in 2009, to go through a new strategic planning process and to look at the trends and to look at, as a result, we established and we launched that strategic plan, which is a community-wide response. You will see also with you in your packet the information regarding the new committee structure. I believe I sent some information to Council earlier on, asking if there's anyone you would like to recommend to any of those committees to feel free to make the recommendation through our office. So I think that kind of gives you a little bit of a synopsis of where we're heading. We just launched a strategic plan. We are just starting our new committee structure. Actually, on October 1st, We had our first half-day session. And I think it's also important to note the caliber of the individuals who are leading these committees. With us, we have here today Chief William Danahan, who chairs our Reentry Leadership Coalition on the evaluation and research. Jeff Maury from our ISC director from the county co-chairs that committee with Dr. David Hussey from Case Western Reserve University. So we're very, very fortunate to have the caliber of leadership that is a part of the committee structure, the new committee structure. I think at this point I'd like to entertain some of your questions.
Director, thank you very much for that presentation, and we're now open to questions by the council. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not directing this exactly at you. I just want to have a better understanding about fringe benefits. I'm looking at the figures. We have 6 full-time employees?
Correct. There's 6 full-time employees at the Office of Reentry.
Okay. The increase of 4307 is about $717 per employee, which doesn't seem, I can understand. What I can't understand is what exactly is included in fringe benefits.
I'm going to direct that line to the Office of Budget and Management, who I think is here today.
I'm just wondering if this is consistent through all, because it's almost $24,000 per full-time equivalent, and because it's saying 143,000 divided by 6. Is that possible?
Director Rubino.
Matt Rubino, Office of Budget Management. I think the increase for reentry was just over $4,000, and that's only for the hospitalization component. Fringe benefits in any of the budgets consist of PRS and Medicare. That's the largest piece, and that's over 15% of the actual salary line, and that's standard. The second largest component would be the employer's share of hospitalization, and that's what we were applying that 6% increase to agencies based on the expenditure patterns we've seen this year.
Okay.
And we've maintained that throughout. In some areas, if we felt there was enough capacity within the existing combined staffing budget, we didn't do the full 6%, but we used that 6% as guidance for trying to get the budget proposed for 13 in line with, number one, actual trends we're seeing now that we know what the enrollment is, and then also from the estimated growth related to inflation for healthcare, which is 6% that we're estimating. But I refer back to my comments yesterday. We're outperforming the estimates in 12, so there is a chance that we could outperform those estimates next year, meaning lower all-in costs. We'll have to see.
Okay. I guess my confusion was, in private business, we pay employer share of Social Security. I don't consider that a fringe benefit. It's people feel that's part of doing business. So now I understand, since you're including the PERS employer portion. Thank you.
Okay, Councilman Jones is next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Vasquez, this committee approved $150,000 for the social entrepreneurship program this year and $250,000 for next year. I see there was an 8% surplus because, as you mentioned, things have not moved. I guess they're still moving along. There was a third component, the deconstruction of homes and retaining the salvageable parts. Where is that in the process, and will there be dollars targeted for that this year?
We have started that process. As you know, this was a combined RFP between the Cuyahoga County Office of Reentry of dollars we encumbered from 2010, and then we leverage those dollars with the Cleveland Foundation. So that process has already started. All of those enterprises, the only two that have going to be launching in terms of being actually operational will be, we're expecting to have the open house for the Salon Spa on Mayfield Road and Green around December. They're just doing pretty much finishing all the renovations. And then I think that around December, we also expect to see, based on our visit to the site this last Friday with Councilwoman Conwell. I think it was important is that we wanted to see how are these businesses really bringing results. And so one of the things is that I wanted to note is that while we have the support able to leverage the dollars, there's other social enterprises that we are looking at from an entrepreneurship standpoint. That's where we want to launch those additional dollars into an RFP for employment training and a different defined sort of entrepreneurship towards those particular dollars. That's why we wanted to have enough sufficient dollars, and I've noted that in the PowerPoint and also the pages that addresses that. We felt it was really important not to lose the only housing component that we have available, which is housing and employment are the number two pieces that historically has, and also is proof of that by the community-wide response of the strategic plan. And you notice in red the areas that were identified as priorities. But we wanted to make certain that the only component of housing that we wouldn't lose that, and that's the remaining dollars. We're directing them, towards that particular new RFP. Okay, thank you. Thank you, sir.
Any other questions, Councilman Rogers?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, is the Second Chance Grant Award reflected in the budget?
No, I addressed the fact that on the other revenues, I wanted to make note of that those were dollars that we just received again for the second chance. So that's why I noted that. But I don't believe is reflected unless I stand to be corrected by the Office of Budget and Management.
So
those are federal dollars. Those are federal dollars. Those are not levy dollars or general fund dollars.
No, I understand. That's why I was wondering why it wasn't reflected in the other revenue section.
That's why I noted that.
Okay. And so do you issue RFPs for the work to be done under?
Correct. And you bring an excellent point, Councilman Rogers. We're in our third year since the office opened in 2009, and I noted to all of the contact service provider that we would be issuing a new set of RFPs. We've already set up, addressed two RFPs, one on literacy, which is our Project Learn. That was a new RFP that was authored this year. As well as the one for the Neighborhood Reentry Research Center, the North Star. That was another new RFP. So everything will be under a new request for proposals based on the fact that we're in our third year mark. And historically, we've always launched new RFPs of the third year because we need to look at the fact whether we want to fund those same services. And I noted that to many of the contact service provider at our coalition meetings that there will be a new set of RFPs, not necessarily mean that we will be contracting for the same services, but we need to take a look at, what are the trends and how can we best invest those limited dollars that we have available for us at the Office of Reentry. And again, that is consistent with the new strategic plan and the priority areas that we will be placing some dollars on an RFP basis and have identified those and also in the PowerPoint.
Do you know when you anticipate releasing RFPs for the?
We're anticipating releasing RFP within the next 2 months, very aggressively. One of the things that I think is also important is that now we're moving into contract years from January to December. When the Office of Reentry first opened in 2009, we had our RFPs, our contact service providers, because of the fact that the office opened in 2009, we were just launching RFPs at the beginning of the year then. So many of our contracts started either July 1st or June 30th. Now we're moving into the January to December to be consistent with the county contractual service year.
And then lastly, I'm looking at page 6 of the PowerPoint where you have $460,000 under the employment training and social enterprise.
That's a new RFP that we will be launching.
That's a new RFP?
That's going to be a new RFP, and those are the dollars that will be dedicated to that.
Okay, and that's part of the $250,000?
That's part.
And then the other part will be
towards housing.
A continuation of employment and training services that does that work on job placement and?
Correct.
Okay. And when do you anticipate that RFP to go out?
Those RFPs we're anticipating within the next 2 months we'll be able to launch this RFP to hopefully start in January.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
How long have you been the director?
I was summoned to Director McCafferty's office, then Director McCafferty in 2008, around August of 2008.
And in your tenure, when was the last time that you could recall your employees got a cost of living adjustment?
I don't, to the best of my recollection, it's been approximately 5 years since we've had a cost of living
Thank you.
adjustment. Thank you, sir.
And that's a long time. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilman.
We are going to take a 10-minute break to get it teed up for the mental health board in the hospital. And so we will reconvene a couple minutes before 11 o'clock. We stand in recess. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. It's called teeing it up.
This resolution for the collective bargaining, just state that on there.